Good evening, everyone. We're just going to give everyone a few minutes to join the webinar here, and then we'll get started with our presentation from Melinda Myers. So just sit tight for just a couple minutes. I see lots of people joining the webinar. We'll get started in just a moment here. Okay, well, let's get going here. So good evening and welcome to Milwaukee Public Library. My name is Kelly Bolter. I'm the adult programming coordinator at the library. And joining me this evening is librarian Beth from our East Branch Library. She's the adult services librarian there. And we are very excited to welcome back Melinda Myers for another great presentation. This evening, we are talking about managing water on your property. So during the presentation, if you have any questions, feel free to slide those in the Q&A. We will have time at the end of the program for a question and answer session. And also this webinar is being recorded, so we'll send that out probably within a few days after this evening. So be on the lookout for that. And we will also reshare these slides that Melinda is going to be showing this evening as well. So again, throw those questions in the Q&A, we'll keep an eye on it, and then we'll have some time at the end to have a fun discussion. So with that, I will give it over to Melinda.
Thanks, Kelly and Beth. It's so wonderful to have all of you join me to talking about something near and dear to my heart. I know that I think you received a copy of the handout in an email, and Beth usually puts a link to that as well in the chat. So I'm putting you on the spot there, Beth. So managing water on your property. Let's get started. I want to thank the sponsors, Fresh Coast Guardians and Milwaukee Metro Sewage District, for their sponsorship. Thanks to them, we could offer this for free to give you some tips on helping to keep water on your property for the benefit of your landscape instead of running into the storm sewer and overwhelming that. Milwaukee Public Library, great partners throughout my career, and I thank you for hosting this webinar. It makes my job easier and helps me reach more people, so thanks. Well, it does matter where what we do above ground. Sometimes it's easy to forget that the water from our tap goes a long way, and it starts with rainfall that runs off our lawn, and anything we do on our property can impact the water ending up in the storm sewer that can go to waterways and lakes, and then it has to be cleaned and put back to us. So the more we do to manage water on our property, the less money and energy needed to make that water drinkable. So we can protect your home during heavy rains. So on your handout, there's a link to the rain check brochure, and that's good whether you live in Southeast Wisconsin or not. And there are tips on things that you can do to help keep your basement dry, water out of your house. Now, obviously, I'm going to focus on the horticulture things, but there are lots of other things that you can do to help keep water on your property out of the basement and out of the storm sewer. And a healthy landscape helps manage water where it falls. And so when we think about, as gardeners, what we can do something we love to help improve our water quality, create beautiful landscapes, and keep water on that property. Now, it may be just a change of habit or two. This was my house I used to live in Milwaukee. And as you can see, I needed to sweep the pavement, but lots of green space. So having a garden is one thing that we can do. So let's start from the ground up. It's not the pretty part of landscaping. There are just a few of us that would drag our friends and relatives to look at the soil, and a lot of you probably appreciate good soil. So let's look at how we can fix it. I like this profile because it reminds us that topsoil is that precious thing that really is usually composed of organic matter, some mineral matter, and airspace, and good for growing plants. Now, if your house was built recently, especially, A lot of times what happens is they'll dig out the basement, spread the subsoil, which may be gravel and sand like you see here, or it might be heavy clay. They spread that over the surface, then put a couple inches of topsoil. And when the water runs through that topsoil, it drains quickly, but then it hits the clay and it takes a long time to drain. So it's very shallow roots for those plants. If your subsoil is sand and rock, it drains quickly, so that topsoil holds moisture, but when the roots hit that sand and clay, they're exposed to drier conditions. So creating a good root zone for our plants to grow is important. I always like to recommend soil testing. I know you're not all going to do it, but if you're starting a new garden, that's a perfect time. Find out the nutrients that are in your soil, and that way you'll spend less money and apply the right material, the right fertilizers for the plant you're trying to grow. Or if you're having a problem, a soil test is a good way to see, does the problem lie in the soil, whether it's a lack of organic matter, lack of nutrients. And then every few years, like 4 or 5 years, to see if your maintenance is on par with the plant needs. Adding compost and organic matter is a great way to improve soil. It improves drainage in heavy clay soil, and it increases the water holding ability in sandy and gravelly soils. Now, there's been a lot of research, and I think it was Cornell University did a lot of research on the benefits of adding compost to your gardens. It provides a variety of essential plant nutrients over a longer period of time. So it feeds your plants like we're supposed to eat, little meals throughout a longer period. And they found that plants growing in compost amended soil have fewer disease and insect problems than those that are growing in poor soil. And it's another way to keep plant-based kitchen scraps and garden waste out of the landfills. I like this setup this gardener has. They have the compost pile right by their garden, so it's easy to put the raw materials in, and when the compost is finished, use them right back in the garden where they're needed. Adding compost also reduces rainwater and fertilizer runoff into our waterways. So it helps allow the rainfall to be absorbed in the soil, so it's absorbed rather than running off. And that keeps that rainwater where it falls. So that means you're going to water less often and you're going to conserve the moisture. So it's less work for you once that compost is added. Now, one option is to till that compost in. We need to add about an inch for every 2 inches of soil. That's if you do tilling, and I will talk about no-till in a minute. And we want to really amend the top 8 to 12 inches of soil. Now, this is something you probably aren't going to do every year, but if your soil's really bad, you might want to do that initially and then use some of the no-till methods that I'm going to talk about now. One of those is top dressing your garden. And so we can just add an inch or two over the soil surface of existing gardens. The Perennial Plant Association found that if you're growing your garden, your perennials in decent soil, and you top dress every other year or every second or third year, that's sufficient. That usually provides enough nutrients for the plants you're growing. And then check how your plants are growing. And if need be, then you can just kind of spot treat your fertilizer as opposed to fertilizing the whole bed. And then if your soil is not so good, you may want to do vertical mulching. So one of the options is to spread the compost over the soil surface or use your auger bit on a cordless drill that aerates the soil. And then as you can see here, we added compost there to help break up that soil. This is an excellent method if you've got a perennial garden that's not bad enough to start over, but not as good as you want. You can aerate soil, which is so helpful for heavy clay soil, and you can work that compost into the root zone around your perennial plants. Now, let's say you want to do some no-till methods. Lasagna gardening is one of them. I moved about 7, 8, 9 years ago, and I have sandy, rocky soil now, and it really needs a lot of organic matter. And I thought, I don't have the 26 years I had when I started my garden in the city. And so I decided to use the lasagna gardening method. It basically takes plant waste. So you can see I've got some evergreen needles, I've got dry leaves, I use kitchen scraps, worm castings, some nitrogen rich and some carbon rich materials, the same things you'd throw in your compost pile. So the first layer, I just measured out my garden bed. I typically do 4 by 8 foot beds. They're just kind of easier to manage. I can reach all parts. I measured out the bed, put down a layer of newspaper, put 8 to 10 inches of the green and brown debris, cover it with an inch of compost, added some fertilizer. I kept repeating until the bed was 18 to 24 inches high. Now, I just did this as a standalone bed. Some people will do this inside a raised bed garden frame. And then you could plant right away, or you could do this in the fall and plant in the spring. I plant right away because it seems like I'm always in a hurry. Hugelkultur takes this one step further, and I think there might be some of you that have done some Hugelkultur gardening. Now, when you look on the internet, a lot of these are shaped like a big pyramid, but I live out in a windy area. I have very sandy soil, so I decided to put my base layer 2 feet deep underground because I thought I just wanted to make a lower profile raised bed because of the wind and the sand. So your first layer are branches and logs. So, if you have a neighbor has a tree removed or you have a tree removed, no black walnuts because they're toxic to other plants, no black locust or cedar because they break down slowly. The idea here is those logs are going to absorb moisture and break down slowly over decades. Think about looking at a tree that's fallen in the woods, and you can see it kind of turns into a sponge, right? Absorbing the moisture from the surroundings and breaking down. So that's what we want to have happen with these logs. Then we're going to throw branches and fall leaves, dried leaves, carbon-rich leaves to fill in that space. Now, the first time I heard about Hugelkultur garden, I thought, for years, I've told people don't work wood into the soil because the microorganisms that break down those wood products will use nitrogen from the soil, temporarily tie it up, eventually release it, but your plants are stunted. So I was a little hesitant, but UW-Madison found that it doesn't tie up the nitrogen. And this is a garden in my back bed that I made like 6 years ago. So I found firsthand that isn't a problem. So on top of this, we put nitrogen-rich green material, and then we just repeat the lasagna gardening, put 6 inches of soil on top of plantable mix, and you can plant right away. And this is just an example of an ornamental garden that someone was kind enough to send me a picture of her Hugelkultur garden, where she created those raised Hugelkultur beds and planted them with ornamentals. I grew vegetables in mine, and even though it's now level with the surrounding soil, you can tell it's much softer. And if you accidentally walk into the bed, you sink down a little bit. So perfect for growing plants. Both lasagna and Hugelkultur speed up the process, so you'll have good quality plantable mix in a short time. In your handout, there are links to videos and also some information on both of those for a little more detail. Protect the soil with mulch. So bark is great for pathways around trees and shrubs. It breaks down slowly, eventually adding organic matter. Not only does it protect the soil from compaction when we have heavy rains, but it slows the water so that it's absorbed rather than running off. Leaves are another great mulch. So those fall leaves, don't rake them to the curb. Instead, use them in your gardens. They suppress weeds, they conserve moisture, they keep the roots cooler. And again, as they break down, they do add organic matter. So it does all those good things for helping absorb the water. This is my friend Dorothy, and she collects leaves from her neighborhood, and she has a place behind her fence, kind of between a double fenced area where she stashes them, and then she takes them out a pot at a time to help mulch around the garden. We're going to talk jumping worms in a minute, so we'll talk about that. Needles are great. Needles do not make your soil too acidic, neither do the cones. The garden on the right is Paul's garden, and it was so much fun when I visited it because it smelled like up north. When I moved to Wisconsin many years ago, everybody talked about up north. And I'm originally from Ohio, and I thought, we have beautiful places in Ohio. And I went up north, and it was beautiful. And I know all states have a beautiful space, but it was a lot of evergreen forest, and it smelled good. And that's what that garden reminded me of. So you don't have to worry about the soil being too acidic. You don't have to worry about maple and oak leaves ruining the soil. They're big, and they tend to break down slowly. So you can chop them with the mower or leave them intact to help the pollinators. I thought I'd mention jumping worms. They are a problem in many states, here in Wisconsin especially. These are not native. earthworms aren't native to Wisconsin either. The native ones were wiped out during the glaciers. They do eat organic matter, but jumping worms are voracious. They eat so much organic matter, they ruin the texture and the chemistry of our soil, and they spread rapidly. So from your garden, they can encroach into natural spaces. And so that's one of our big concerns. So sharing plants, as much as gardeners love to, if you suspect you have jumping worms, don't share any plants because you'll be sharing the jumping worms. The adults die over winter in cold climates, but their cocoons and eggs are tiny, tiny, so you don't even see them. And so they could go along with the plants. If you purchase compost and mulch, ask the dealer, how are they dealing with jumping worms? And if they go, then you need to find a different place to buy your mulch and compost. The last thing you want to do is bring in jumping worms. And then there's a great a webinar by UW Madison Arboretum. Brett Horick, I think is his name. And then there's a link on the handout to a blog I did for Milorganite on jumping worms and trying to manage them. So we fix the soil, or that's an ongoing process, right, if you're a gardener. But now we're going to talk about harvesting rain. If you're not in Wisconsin and you're in a state that has restrictions, always ask your municipality if there are any restrictions. Here in Wisconsin and most states, municipalities encourage harvesting of rainwater, and some even offer rain barrels at a discount or offer rebates. So as you can see, this gardener made it convenient and a piece of art. So when you're picking a rain barrel, here are some features to look for. There should be a screen to keep bugs and debris out, or the opening should match the size of your downspout so you don't get debris inside. The spigot should be low on the barrel so you don't have water stagnating at the base. You need an overflow at the top so that you can direct water away from the foundation. And we'll talk about downspout diverters in a minute. And then a stand to elevate that, because you're going to use gravity to help increase the water pressure as you try to fill it. This gardener went all out. You can collect 623 gallons of water from 1,000 square foot roof in a 1-inch rain. So that's what, 63 gallons per square foot. So when you're disconnecting your downspout, kind of think, okay, this corner is probably going to produce this much in a 1-inch rain. So this gardener put this in an area where they mask it with some plantings out of sight from their neighbors, but were able to collect a lot more water. I mentioned downspout diverter. So the city of Milwaukee, I'm going to show a connection to one of their videos that you could watch, but they're recommending downspout diverters. So if you need to stay connected to the storm sewer, you want to leave your downspout intact and direct water away, what happens here is the water goes from that diverter into the rain barrel. When the rain barrel's full, it closes off and redirects the water back down the downspout. So you can see how that happens here. And I want to thank Gardener Supply for the use of their images. Now I mentioned the overflow. So these rain barrels, if you notice, the overflow is up high. So instead of directing it out from the foundation of the building, they're going from one to the next, and then they have an overflow from one of those barrels. So they can collect several, 55 gallons. So there's 110 gallons by using two, or maybe even want to interconnect more. Now I mentioned MMSD, they've got a great how to install a rain barrel. There's a link on your handout and they show you how to do this and use a downspout diverter in the kit that they sell to residents in their service area. And so this is just to help make it easy, but even if you're not using their downspout, it's an excellent video that I would recommend you check out. Now, for some places, you might want to be disconnecting from the stormwater sewer. And for folks in Milwaukee, there's a link to the city of Milwaukee directions on where to do it. You need to check with your municipality. Some want you to disconnect, but in some areas in the city, it's hard to disconnect because you're going to put the water next to your neighbor's house. When I lived at the city, I had a county easement and enough garden I could direct water away from my foundation and my neighbor's house, but she was kind of landlocked. And so if she disconnected, she'd be pushing water by my basement and to her neighbors. So check with your municipality first. But if you are disconnecting like we did here, you want to be sure to cap that off so no rodents end up in that drain pipe. And then when you set your rain barrel in place, so this was Dawn, and she painted that rain barrel eventually, but we left it blue because we did a video on installing a rain barrel and we wanted to make it show up. So you want to level that location where you're going to set the rain barrel. We use cinder blocks to elevate that rain barrel in place. And then this is Mark, who was working with us, and he lined up the rain barrel to the downspout. So we used an elbow. And again, we purposely used colors that didn't match, and then Dawn could fix it later so that they showed up and we had that nice contrast. So Mark was figuring out, where do we need to disconnect the downspout to direct it into that rain barrel? So he marked that location. He used a hacksaw to cut it. Now we saved that bottom portion because Dawn reapplies that in winter when she has to uninstall her rain barrel when the weather gets cold. Attach that, so use screws to attach that elbow to run the water from the downspout into the rain barrel. And again, save that piece of gutter, store it in your garage or shed out of the way, because you will need to reconnect that for winter if you're in a cold climate. And then make sure wherever you place your rain barrel that you have easy access, because the goal is to use that water, for containers or garden beds. Here, Patty had her downspout. She shortened it and had it dumped directly into her rain barrel. And you can see the blue one and this red one. These were food grade barrels that were converted into rain barrels. And there's a brewery in Milwaukee, I don't know if they're still doing it, that was looking for places to sell at a very discounted rate their food grade 55-gallon barrels that they would get product in to make their beer. So you might want to check for microbreweries in town or other places that might be looking for an opportunity to repurpose those and let you buy them at a discount or get them for free to convert them into rain barrels. One of the big questions I get about rain barrels are mosquitoes. So the good news is these are organic products. Mosquito dunks give you 30 days of control. They kill the larvae. It's a naturally occurring soil bacteria, Bacillus thuringiensis israelensis, and that product kills the larvae of mosquitoes, black flies, and fungus gnats. The mosquito bits give you immediate control, but it only lasts for about a week. So you toss these into your rain barrel, and it's organic and it's safe. So you don't have to worry about if you use the water and somebody drinks out of it. We're thinking wildlife or pets, or for using on your plants. It's organic and safe to use. So you may not want to look at your rain barrel. So one thing you can do is mask it with plantings like this gardener did. Or this is Dawn's handiwork. If you've joined me at the Wisconsin State Fair, you've seen her handiwork. She's such an amazing artist. So she painted several rain barrels for us so that we could have garden art as we collected the water. Now, directing the water to your rain barrel, you could use a rain chain. This was at the Philadelphia Flower Show. This was Temple University's student exhibit, and I always like to do it because they literally used a chain for their rain chain, and just getting creative. You could also purchase them as well. Like you see here, I have some where the cups face up, and so the water spills over it. In the winter, it's icy and it looks like art. This gardener directed the downspout. This is a patio. This is a hard surface. So they'd either, have to run the downspout across or find a way to move the water away from the foundation. So here they're collecting it in a rain barrel where they can use it for their planters nearby. This overhang extended over a garden. So the rain chain went right. There's a stone you can't see to break the velocity of the water, so it would slowly soak into that soil. The other question I get about rain barrels, is it safe to use the water? Rutgers University did some research and they found that the bacterial level from bird droppings and the debris on the roof and any of the chemicals was way below federal standards. But they do recommend that you do test it if you're going to use it on edibles or for any other purpose. So the safest thing to do is just use it on your ornamental plants. And this is water from my well water, not my rain barrel. But just checking out, have your water tested if you're concerned, but otherwise use it on flower beds, containers with flowers as opposed to edibles. But again, their research, and there's a link to that shares some of that research for you to review. Okay, so now we're going to take it one step further. So we've been collecting water from our rain barrels. How about installing a rain garden? This is taking it one step further. And if you've been joining me for these webinars with the library and MMSD and Fresh Coast Guardians, we talked about planning your rain garden, selecting plants, and we're going to do one on planting rain gardens as well. So these are available through the library's YouTube channel to watch. But the idea of a rain garden is not to create a water feature. It's to collect the water off of hard surfaces and then drain within 24, preferably 48 hours at the most. This was in a park, in a Milwaukee County park, and it was along a bikeway in between a roadway and a bikeway. So the idea is the water runs off that hard surface. It runs into this rain garden. It's going to be at a slight depression so that the water collects and then gradually infiltrates the soil below. And then here are some of the benefits. It's pretty, having a garden is always a good thing. And if you plant it, you can have flowers throughout the season. It manages stormwater, as I mentioned. So instead of going to the storm sewer, it's going into the garden, getting cleaned by the plant roots and soil, and eventually recharging our groundwater. And then we use plants, a lot of natives especially, that are well adapted to this kind of situation, and they support pollinators and birds. That means more beauty coming in your yard. A lot of the states, university extensions, Fresh Coast Guardians has links to this as well, to lots of information on planting the rain garden. I really recommend a guide like the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources Rain Garden Guide for homeowners and landscapers. It takes you step by step through the process. There is a little math involved, but don't worry, they make it easy. But it's a good way to take you step by step to help you plan where to place your rain garden, how big to make it, all those key features so that you know that you'll be successful, that it does actually capture the rainfall. So as I mentioned, we do have lots of videos about installing rain gardens. So there is a video that I did for MMSD and Fresh Coast Guardians. There's a link to that, and it's on the Fresh Coast Guardians website as well. So you can check that process from start to finish. And in that brochure for the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources, here's kind of their guide. You want to make sure, if possible, the rain garden is at least 10 feet from the foundation, minimally 6 feet, but no more than 30. If you go 30 feet away, not only are you getting the water from the roof, but the lawn, and that's a lot more water for that rain garden to manage. So if you keep it around between 10 and 30 feet, it's going to be great. A good, perfect distance. You want that wide part of the garden perpendicular to the water source, just like you see here. Now, this gardener was planning on capturing a lot of rainfall in their rain garden. You don't have to start this big. Any garden is going to help. Any size rain garden will help. 200, 300 square feet is a kind of a minimal and maybe manageable. So that's a good size garden. So, that's 10 by 30. We did 182 square feet, and that was handling about 750 square feet of roof, and that was sufficient. So it doesn't have to be this big. So don't get overwhelmed by this. Couple things I want to point out. They had amended the soil. So you have an indentation so that the water collects and doesn't run off. They've amended it with compost. So if you have fast draining soil, you want to hold the moisture so you're not watering your rain garden once the plants are established. If you have heavy soil, you add the compost so it drains well. You can see they put a berm on the outside edge. So if we have a heavy rainfall, it reduces or slows the overflow over and outside of the rain garden. You need to direct that water from your house to the rain garden. Here they had a downspout extension and a swale with some stone, so that would direct it to the garden so that it's there. And then you could see directly opposite, they put some stone as well. So if there is an overflow, that it overflows into those stones and it slows the velocity so it doesn't rush into the storm sewer. You could even plant that swale. This is at Northwind Perennial Gardens in Burlington, Wisconsin. And this is dry riverbed. And you could do the same kind of idea to direct the water. So when there's water, it's a riverbed, and when it's dry, it isn't. But just another way to kind of dress up that rocky swale. I loved what this gardener did. So they had to get the water from the house out beyond the walkway. So they made it easy for maintenance, for shoveling the snow, avoiding tripping hazards. This was a project I did last summer with a group, and this rain garden we put it about 10 feet away from the foundation of the house. The soil was pretty bad, and so to make maintenance easy, because here's the other deal. If someone's got to mow that grass and they have to go around the garden, it's not going to happen. In this place, the downspout was ripped off the building, and I think that was because whoever was mowing was annoyed and knocked it over. So we did reattach the downspout, but we dug a trench and then we buried the drain pipe in there. And this is, you can see we laid the sod, we took up, backfilled, buried the drain pipe. We put a rodent protectant on the end because we didn't want anybody crawling in there and dying. We put lots of stones at the base to slow the velocity of water. So when all that water ran off the roof and it came out the end of that buried drain pipe, the stone slowed it down so we didn't get erosion. This is kind of a grand scale, so you need to use your imagination here. This is Retzer Nature Center in Waukesha County in Wisconsin, for anybody in Southeast Wisconsin. They put on an addition to their building. And when they did that, they directed the gutters, you can kind of see, onto support in the arbor, and then you see the rain chain at the end. So they directed water from the roof down the gutters, across the arbor, and into their rain garden. Now, you may not have such a big setup, but if you've got a pergola, you could do the same thing. Run that water away from your house, make that gutter, hide that in the construction of the pergola, and then run the water to your rain garden. And then this is just another view you can see. So obviously this is a very natural setting. They have a large garden. So the water comes from the garden, the gutter, off the building, across that pergola, and then down the rain chain. They put big stone there to slow the velocity of the water, and then it slowly drains into the surrounding garden beds. So just something that I know gardeners are creative, and somebody out there is going, I could do something like this. So once you decide where to put your rain garden, how you're going to get the water there, you're going to be selecting plants. Native plants really fit this. There are some ornamentals. The key is these are plants that tolerate flooding and drought, because there are going to be periods when the soil's really wet, but there are also going to be periods when we don't have regular rainfall, and those plants need to tolerate dry conditions. So look for plants described as tolerant of wet and dry soil conditions. Now, if you are in the Milwaukee Metro Sewage District service area, you can buy your rain garden plants. I checked today, there's still some available, but order early. The sale ends April 12th, and it closes as soon as supplies are no longer available. So you may want to look for purchasing those at a great discount. The idea is here, they want you to use native plants suitable for rain gardens and create rain gardens to help keep water out of the storm sewer. So once you get those plants, it's time to put them in the ground. And we're going to put the more drought tolerant plants on the edges where it tends to dry out quicker, and those that tolerate wet soil better in the lowest part of your rain garden, where the water tends to collect and stand a lot longer. plant them at the same level they were growing, and leave the tags by the plants or take pictures, because next spring when these sprout, and maybe a few weeds as well, it'll make identifying the good from the bad much easier. And we'll talk more detail in the How to Plant Your Rain Garden webinar that's coming up in May. So that's the How to Plant a Rain Garden on May 12th, and it will be hosted by the library again. So registration information is available on my website, melindamyers.com, and also through the library. Okay, so how about a stormwater-friendly lawn? We don't always think about lawns and sustainability, but lawns do help absorb moisture. They're great play areas. They're kind of that backdrop for your garden beds. So if you are looking for a storm-friendly lawn, here's some things to do for that. One is mow high. Now, mowing high doesn't mean you're going to mow often. You're going to let that grass grow taller. For cool season grasses, we're talking about 3.5 inches tall, even 4. The taller the grass, the deeper the roots. That means they're more drought tolerant, more pest and disease resistant. And so grow your grass taller. Remove no more than 1/3 at a time. Now, I know that's not always possible. There's those spring rainy periods or you're on vacation. So if this is what it looks like when you're done mowing, then what you'll want to do is run the mower over a second or third time to chop them up. Use a sharp blade. Make sure your lawnmower blade is sharp. And this is, if I was in person, I'd try to look to see who's going, I'm supposed to sharpen my blade. And yes, I know I need to clean the bottom of my mower. I will do that and take another picture. But a sharp blade leaves a clean cut that closes quicker. Your lawn looks better. You'll use up to 25% less fuel when you're cutting your lawn, and the lawn will use up to 30% less water. So it's saving fuel, water, and your time because you can cut quicker and your lawn will look better. Leave the clippings on the lawn. 1 season of clippings is equal to 1 pound of nitrogen, and that's 1 fertilization per year. Now, there was some work out of Doug Soldat, who's with the University of Wisconsin, had talked about established lawns that have been around for 15 years. If you've been leaving your clippings and doing some fertilization, probably can get by with just leaving the clippings and 1 fertilization a year. Or if you're looking for low maintenance lawn that keeps your feet from getting muddy when it rains, but you have a few weeds in there, but you're okay with how it's looking and the grass is doing okay, 1 fertilization in the fall and leaving your clippings on the lawn is probably good enough to keep your lawn healthy. If you're going to water thoroughly and less frequently, and I've got some things to help you determine when to water, but maybe you want to allow your lawn to go dormant. You can see this gardener waters her flower beds and her trees and shrubs, the permanent plantings. She uses soaker hoses throughout those garden beds, but allowed her lawn to go dormant. But in a cool season grass, you want to water about 1/4 inch every 3 weeks. It'll keep the lawn dormant, but it'll keep the crown from dying out. So the goal is to not bring your lawn out of dormancy. It's just to keep the crown of the plants alive. You will have more weeds, I have to admit, because you can see what's growing. You can see where there's a little spillover of water, but weeds always seem to tolerate drought much better than our grasses. Avoid what I call brown and soak, and actually it's a friend of mine who has an irrigation company. What happens is we let our lawns go dormant, and then you get tired of looking at the brown lawn, so you start watering, and then the municipality puts watering restrictions on, or you're worried about your water bill, so you stop. Those lawns that you bring in and out of dormancy are the ones that suffer the most. So if you allow your lawn to go dormant, leave it dormant. Now, we can't change rainfall patterns, right? So if nature brings it in and out of dormancy, there's nothing you can do, but don't add to the problem. And usually nature is not the issue. It's usually irrigating. We're tired of the brown lawn, we water, we get our water bill, or we look at the usage, then we stop, and it goes brown back and forth. That stresses the lawn. Now, if you do decide to water, here's one of the things to look for. If when you walk across your lawn, your footprints remain, that's a good indication that you need to water. So water thoroughly, and that will help encourage good deep roots. and if you want to keep your lawn actively growing during dry periods. Now, if you're not watering your lawn, I forgot to mention, minimize foot traffic and equipment traffic on dormant lawns, and don't use chemicals. That's harmful to the dormant lawn. And then an inch of water per week is usually what most lawns need. Now, obviously, if it's hotter, if your soil's drying out faster, if you have sandy soil, you'll do a half an inch every 4 to 5 days instead of 1 inch at a time. On clay soils, 1 inch application because it's going to fill in slower. Place a couple of shallow cans around your sprinkler if you're doing overhead sprinkling. And if you have stand-up sprinklers, sprinkler heads, put out a couple cans and measure it. And then when you've got an inch of water in there, you know you've applied enough. And what I like to do is turn my faucet. I usually do it full strength, and then check the time. And then, okay, let's say it took 20 minutes to apply that much water. Then I know full force, this sprinkler setting, it takes that much to apply an inch. And then that makes it easier. So you don't have to have the cans out every time. That's just to calibrate your application. I talked a little bit about fertilizer, but some of you may want to do a bit more than just enough to keep your lawn growing. So we want to base our fertilization schedule on how we use the lawn and what kind of quality you're looking for. You know, if you want a really high quality lawn, you're going to fertilize more often. If you've got a lot of kids or you use your lawn for sports and activities, a lot of foot traffic, you're probably going to need to fertilize a little more often to help keep the lawn in good shape. I work with Milorganite, so I do want to disclose that. It's a low nitrogen, slow release fertilizer. Couple reasons I like it. If you apply it and it gets hot and dry and you decide not to water, it won't burn your lawn. You can't overdo it. Not that I ever recommend over fertilizing. It fertilizes over a long period of time because it's slow release. It contains 85% organic matter, so it also feeds the soil as well as your plants. And then the other thing research out of Florida found is that when the microorganisms work on releasing the nutrients from the pellets, it also releases some of the phosphorus and potassium bound into our soils. And most of us have high to excessive levels, but it's not available to the plants. So it makes the phosphorus good for rooting, flowering and fruiting, which we don't care about in lawns, and potassium good for disease resistance and hardiness available to the plant. So that's an added benefit. And then always sweep your clippings and fertilizer off your walks and drive. Put it back in the lawn where the clippings can add organic matter, nutrients, and moisture into the lawn, and any fertilizer back in there because you don't want it running off in the storm sewer. You took the time to apply it, you paid the money to put it down, you might as well get the maximum use. If you are gardening on compacted soil, aerating will help make openings for that and break through the thatch layer. It's a lot less stressful than dethatching your lawn. So you can open it up. It's that vertical mulching like I showed you for flower beds, but for your lawn. The soil should be moist, not soggy, wet, because if it's really hard and dry, it won't break in, cut into that. And you're removing plugs, not punching holes in the soil. And then if possible, you want to top dress. You can tell I need to treat for fungus gnats. You want to top dress with compost, and that'll help fill in any of those openings. The grass will grow through. Putting compost on the top will also help speed the decomposition of thatch and improve the soil. And then in the fall, mow and leave the leaves on the lawn. As long as you can see the grass for those leaf pieces, it will be fine. And so those will break down, add organic matter and nutrients to the soil. Again, don't rake them to the curb, leave them on the lawn. Now, some of you with oak trees or lots of big maples with big leaves may need to mow over a few times or remove some, but leave the majority on the lawn to break down. A healthy lawn is your best defense against weeds and disease. And so digging small populations of weeds is the best thing to do. And you want to make sure that not only do you dig the top, but you remove the roots as well. And gently tamp it back in so the lawn can also spread. And then eco-friendly products. There are some eco-friendly products, and there's information in your handout. Corn gluten meal is a pre-emergent. Universities found a spring and fall application after 3 years reduced weeds by up to 80%. It also contains some nutrients. This is a product that contains a chelated iron, but it's at a level way above what fertilizer is. It's Spaheta or Heta, and again, it's in your handout. And this kills broadleaf weed. So you spray this on, turns the weed black, but the grass, if it gets on the grass around it, it won't hurt the grass. It just turns it bright green and fertilizes it. Maybe part of your sustainable lawn, stormwater friendly, is to reduce the amount of lawn. Look at this. So there's lawn, but there's flower beds next to the sidewalk in the house to help capture some of that rainfall. Or maybe you want to do alternatives. I did a blog for Milorganite on alternatives. No-mow, which is a blend of fescues that you can either let grow and flop like a meadow or mow it once a month. So it's a little more lawn-like. And a lot of people are going to Dutch clovers because they capture nitrogen from the atmosphere. They're great for the pollinators. So there's lots of different alternatives available. And one of them might be ground covers, especially for those shady areas. This is Epimedium barrenwort that is tolerant of dry shade. It has flowers in the spring, and you can see as those leaves emerge with the flowers, they have a little red tinge. The leaves turn green and then red in the fall. So instead of having green all season, you've got some color and changes as well. Maybe it's gardens, instead of the lawn, you might want to put garden beds. Obviously it depends on the size of your landscape and your neighborhood and your gardening goals, but maybe that's one of the goals. Okay, the next thing we want to do is consider growing more native plants. Purple coneflowers are probably the most popular of the native plants and great for pollinators, and birds love it. When you're selecting your native plants, some of the benefits are they support beneficial insects. This is a great black wasp, and it can be kind of scary to look at, but it's a beneficial insect. It doesn't sting. It's a pollinator that we can appreciate on swamp milkweed. Then natives also help improve our soil. Some, like this gray-headed coneflower, their deep roots break through that heavy clay soil, create entryways for water. As the old roots die, it adds organic matter to the soil. Some bring in nitrogen. This Baptisia is a member of the legume family, so it fixes nitrogen and adds it to the soil, but it's also got a deep root system that helps prevent soil erosion. And this is kind of a nice rendition you've probably seen of native plants. They're deep roots. So they push through breaking up that clay soil, as I mentioned. As the old roots die, they add organic matter. They create pathways for the water. So when stormwater runs across the lawn, hits your native garden planting, it slows it down, and then the water infiltrates through those pathways and eventually recharges the groundwater. Plus, the soil and the roots of the plants help remove a lot of the dirt, impurities, and chemicals before it reaches our groundwater. So the benefits of native plants, besides helping birds and pollinators, and isn't it wonderful to bring them into the landscape, is they need minimal or no fertilization. I usually fertilize when I plant a garden and then let them determine if I need more. They only need to be watered once established. We got to get them established, and that can take a year or two, but once established, you only need to water during extended dry periods, and then dividing as needed. This is goldenrod and asters that provide pollen and nectar for our fall insects and birds that are doing the migrating. And then with native plants, just like any garden plant, select those that are for the right plant, for the right space, and for the right purpose. Do they match your gardening goals? Will they fit the space? Do they provide a season full of flowers? Make sure they match the growing conditions, the type of soil, the type of sunlight. This is a full sun garden with a lot of prairie natives that are just thriving here. And then make sure it fits in the available space. Some native plants are very aggressive. And if you have a small space, you may not want to grow them. When I garden in the city, I showed you my front yard. The backyard was very small. I was so excited to have a yard finally. I planted 3 purple coneflowers in the back. 3 years later, that's all I had. We dug up, and it's we didn't have jumping worms back then, dug up, divided, shared them with the park system. And I found out I needed to manage a little differently. So make sure you pick plants that will fit the space and how much time you have to maintain them. And then the bloom time, texture, and color fits your design. We want flowers for us to enjoy spring through fall with some winter interest. And the pollinators and the birds need those as well. Consider how fast they spread. Some natives have rhizomes and they spread quickly. Think of cup plant, it can take over fast. Some are more clumpers, like Culver's root is a clumper, so it spreads slowly, gets larger in diameter, and it doesn't spread. And some spread by seed. Common milkweed has got some pretty amazing rhizomes. They're about the thickness of a rope, and they're like 6 to 8 inches deep, and it can grow and spread quickly. And it also spreads by seed. I'm not saying don't plant it, but be prepared to manage it, or consider some of the other milkweeds that are less aggressive. So when you're thinking of adding native plants, think substitution. So on the left is fountain grass. There are annual and perennial forms of fountain grass. But how about our native prairie dropseed? Similar growth habit, blooms at the end of the season, nice fall color, good winter interest, and it's hardy, and it's a native plant, so it's going to do a lot more good things for your landscape than the fountain grass. So then we've started with some substitutions, but how about maybe you're going to start a new garden bed? How about a garden with all native plants? So up in the upper left is wild quinine, one of my new favorites. It doesn't spread too aggressively. The blue upright are blazing star. You can see some coneflower to the right, and in the back, wild bergamot. So this is a garden of all native plants, and it looks like maybe some milkweed in there. And then maybe you decide, okay, I'm ready to go all out. This is Stacy and Ken's garden, and they have more of a formal area at the bottom of the hill, and garden is on their hillside, and it's all native plants. They have a walkway for easy access. They also have a path that goes down the hill for sledding in the winter, and they have areas to sit up on top to look at all the visitors to their prairie garden. But if you're going to go all out, make sure that you're prepared to prepare the soil, manage the weeds those first couple of years. It's critical, and then the maintenance will be much less. And if you go all out, especially if you're in a neighborhood, have some signs of intent, artwork, a fence, a birdhouse, so your neighbors know this is intentional. I think people are becoming more aware and a little less overwhelmed by those natural gardens, but let your neighbors know and then put signs of intent. When I just put a regular garden in my front yard, and that was 30 some years ago in Milwaukee, I had a few neighbors that kind of rolled their eyes, and I gradually did it. And I left some grass to make people feel comfortable and see it was a garden that was intended. I work with the American Transmission Company and their Grow Smart program. And if you go to their website, there's some video and information free to download on native plants that are good for pollinators. And Fresh Coast Guardians has some good information on the rain garden plants that MMSD sells. Just a couple more things you can do. Plant trees if space is available. Tree-lined streets are so inviting, but trees do a lot besides providing shade, and they reduce energy costs because they shade our homes, maybe provide a windbreak. They clean pollutants out of the air. And one of the things often overlooked is they help manage storm water. And then this is just a diagram, a picture, a graphic on how that happens. So when rain falls, the tree canopy intercepts some of that. So some of that water just evaporates off the leaves and goes back up in the atmosphere. Some of it falls through, but when it goes through the canopy and it runs down the trunk of the tree, it slows down. And so at that much slower velocity or speed, it can be absorbed into the ground below instead of running off into the storm sewer. Trees absorb a lot of water. It runs through, they use it for all their different processes for growing and staying healthy, and then they lose it back into the atmosphere through transpiration, through their leaves. And what water doesn't get absorbed goes down and recharges the groundwater. And just like our native plants, it removes a lot of the pollutants before it goes to the groundwater. Protect that tree. It's our long-term investment. Mulching the soil around it, keeping the grass away. Grass is a big competitor for new plantings. It keeps weed whips and mowers away, conserves moisture, suppresses weeds. No weed barrier under organic mulches because you create compost above the weed barrier and don't fix the soil below. No mulch volcanoes. That's bad. You often see that where soil and mulch is piled against the trunk. It can lead to rot because that trunk was designed to be above ground. It can lead to adventitious roots that form on the trunk that grow around that trunk and eventually choke out the tree. So if you've got these in your yard, start pulling that mulch back away from the trunk of the tree. And the wider the mulch area, the better for the tree. And then maybe consider using shade-tolerant ground covers. I like to use perennial plants, so I minimize the disturbance to the roots. And then you can see here, this is Chris's garden, and she's got a few pots, but she sets them on the ground. So she has some seasonal interest, but her permanent plantings are in the ground, so she disturbed the soil once. And these are all shade-tolerant plants under the canopy of her tree. And I mentioned that when that water goes down, the mulch not only protects the tree roots, but the ground covers in the mulch slow that velocity, help capture the water so that it's absorbed into the ground instead of running off into the storm sewer. How about some permeable surfaces? If you're thinking of a patio or a sitting area, maybe think differently than putting a solid piece of cement. Here they use pea gravel in this setting. Now you want to think about maintenance. We're in the north where there's snow and ice, and that's fine if you're not going to go out there and you don't have to clear it. So this is a place that you probably would only use during the snow and ice-free season, but this allows the water and the snow to melt and go into the ground. Wood chips are another option for a more informal setting. Pavers with space between, so flagstone pavers, so that water hits and can go between the pavers. Having plants around there, so we've spaced out those pavers a little more. The plants, again, provide a good absorbing surface, but you've got those pavers for maybe a little firmer walking space. I love this. Thyme is a great ground cover. It smells good when you walk over it. When it's in bloom, the bees love it, so keep that in mind if it's a well-used path. But boy, as you brush across that, releases the fragrance. Here they repurposed slabs from a tree that was removed and wood chips. So very natural, organic looking setup. This is at We Energy Park. And about 15 years ago, we had grass between two major garden beds. And by the end of fair, the grass was dead and it looked awful. All the foot traffic, because there are about 170,000 people that walk through the gardens during those 11 days. So they wanted to put a walk, and they were kind enough when I said, well, let's do permeable pavers. And so the contractors, the Wisconsin Landscape Contractors Association, installed these permeable pavers. And what's great is we have garden beds here. We have a rain garden you can't see. We have rain barrels as well, and these permeable pavers. And what's exciting is we had a huge rainstorm during fair, and there was water all over the fairgrounds except on our property. The water soaked in through the garden beds, the rain garden, the rain barrels captured some, and the permeable pavers. So it was great because when we installed them, the person that managed the grounds, when I came in that morning, goes, it's working. And these are great. You just blow off the debris to keep it from clogging up the system, and it works real well. If you're using plants, either use steppers so you don't step on the plants, or look for those that tolerate some foot traffic. And this is a driveway. This is my friend Will, and he had a side-by-side townhouse that he made into a single residence, but he had to maintain the drive that connected the two separate driveways, but he wanted it to be more garden-ish. So the landscaper installed pavers that they're width of a tire, so if you had to drive across, you could, and then made it plantable. And that is such an attractive option. And I think I remember seeing that by my grandma's house in Southern Ohio, a strategy, I think, to save on the cement, where it was just 2 lines of cement for the tire tracks and then plantings in between. And then permeable driveway materials as well. You can find them out on the market. Things have greatly improved. Again, do your research, make sure it's going to work for your style of gardening. And before you put one shovel in the ground, contact Diggers Hotline in Wisconsin. It's 811 anywhere in the country, including Wisconsin. Call 3 days before you put the first shovel in the ground. Because even if you think you know where those utilities are and they're supposed to be buried at a certain depth, soil settles. And if you hit a buried cable, electric line, gas line, it could mean injury or death. So that's definitely a good reason to call at least 3 business days. But even if you hit the cable and not knock it out, your neighbors and family won't be happy, but you pay for the repair of any underground utility you hit if you have not contacted this free service. So 811, it's free anywhere in the country. In Wisconsin, you can also file online at Diggers Hotline at least 3 days before you put the first shovel in the ground. Thanks again to Fresh Coast Guardians and MMSD for sponsoring this webinar. It's really about all of us working together to help improve the water quality, keep water on our landscapes and out of the storm sewer. It's good for all of us. And Fresh Coast Guardians are just a group of people trying to help make a difference. And on their website, you'll find lots of good information, whether it's installing rain barrels, why have a rain garden, how to install a rain garden, plants that you can use. And I want to thank them for their sponsorship of this, help allowing me to reach out to you so we can all work together for better water quality. Thanks again to Milwaukee Public Library. It's always fun to work with them. They are near and dear to my heart. When I started my career many years ago, I gave talks to moms while their preschoolers were in story hour. So the libraries are near and dear to my heart. And I just want to put a plug. We're doing a fun project in June for pollinators. So make sure you stay in touch with both of us. And last but not least, help me grow a garden or two. And it doesn't have to be just youngsters in your life. It could be a young family down the street, a neighbor who's just new to gardening. Somebody inspired you. And if you're a new gardener, welcome. We are so happy to have you in the garden community. And if you're an experienced gardener, share your expertise with the newbies. We want to keep them gardening and help them have fun and be successful. My goal is to grow a kinder and gentler world, one garden and gardener at a time. And to do that, I'm going to need your help. So help me grow a gardener or two. I just want to put a mention, my new Midwest Gardener's Handbook has just been released. So it's out and available. So check it out. It's been updated. I eliminated plants that we found out are maybe on the edge of being invasive and added some new ones, and then updated the content as well. Please stay in touch. All my contact information is on your handout. I am outnumbered, and I know I owe some of you some answers to your questions. I'm hoping while I'm traveling this weekend and I have some time in the airport, I can get busy with some of those answers. So please be patient. And now I want to take some time to answer your questions. So I'm going to turn it back over to Kelly and Beth.
All right, thank you, Melinda, for that wonderful presentation. We do have a number of questions from our audience. This is from an anonymous attendee. They share, I'm still learning about native plants. Are there any types that I should avoid if I want to avoid planting something that may spread to my neighbor's lawn? My neighbors are meticulous gardeners, and I don't want to introduce something that could be weed-like or bully other plants.
You know, that is a great question. I put back on my website strategies for adding native plant. Well, actually, there's a link in your handout to a video I did on strategies for adding native plants. And I also put my webinar back up on my website from last year, and it talks about different ones and how they spread. So I love common milkweed. I would let it grow in my city lot, but it does spread vigorously. I mean, you could easily stop the spread by seeds, just remove the pods before they open. But the rhizomes are, boy, 6 inches deep. They are an inch in diameter, and they are hard to control. I have more space now, and I'm just trying to get it to grow in certain big areas instead of every garden bed. And I'm not winning this battle. But things like butterfly weed are less aggressive. Swamp milkweed is less aggressive. Bee balm reseeds readily, so you'll have seedlings coming up. One thing you may want to do is put a barrier, either a grass barrier between their yard and yours that you could mow or mulch, and that would give you kind of that space so that it will slow down the encroachment of those plants that may be a little more aggressive. So check out and the handout. So if you don't want to watch the webinar, the handout is on there, and I talk about those that are a little more aggressive than others. Bee balm spreads readily. A cup plant spreads readily. I mentioned common milkweed spreads readily. Liatris reseeds readily. That's that spiky plant. But if you remove, I like to leave it for the birds to eat the seeds. So it's kind of, you're going to be pulling up some of those seedlings. Coneflower reseeds readily. So maybe you take some of the seed heads off and leave some up so you have less invading. But I think if you have a barrier between your yard and your neighbors, whether it's mown grass or mulch, I think that will help keep both of you happy. Great question.
All right. Carl would like to know what again was the name of the herbicide/fertilizer you recommended for spraying dandelions that did not kill surrounding grasses?
Okay, so for the herbicide, it is the active ingredient is Feheta, F-E-H-E-D-T-A, or HEDA, H-E-D-T-A. So those are forms of chelated iron, but at a high concentration. So it's not, you don't use it as, you can't buy a chelated iron fertilizer and make it work. You need to get something. I think Scott sells it as EcoSense. Bare Natria may have a product out, but look at the active ingredient. So if you find EcoSense, there's probably similar other trade names available. Doug Sodot, and I think I put a link, he's with UW Extension. I think I put a link in your handout for sustainable lawn care, low risk lawn care, and he's got a list of products, but that's the active ingredient. It's a little pricey, but it works. So what happens is you spray it, the weed turns black, the grass around it turns green, and so you'd use it in your lawn. And so it's really good if you have just a few, either a small lawn or just a few weeds. If you have a big area, it's probably not practical. The other thing is a pre-emergent, meaning you apply it to kill the weed seeds or seeds in general, and that's corn gluten meal. And it's sold as a maize is one of the brand names. It's pretty readily available. You apply it in the spring to get those weed seeds that would sprout in the spring. So about the time the forsythia are blooming, before the bridal spirea flower, and then in the fall to get any of those winter weeds, the winter annuals. And that's a pre-emergent, and it does kill the seeds of good plants too. So read and follow the label directions carefully.
Okay, and this is a good question. I know sometimes we kind of throw around the green infrastructure terms.
Oh, thank you.
Helen would like to know what's the difference between a rain garden and a bioswale?
Good question. So a rain garden is usually planted and you're right, especially if you go, I kind of feel like I'm the in-between between the infrastructure people, and the rain garden is really usually planted as part of your landscape. A bioswale is usually used in connection with a hard surface directly. So for most of us, we'd be putting our rain garden in a lawn area or creating that as a garden bed and maybe stopping the water from going to the sidewalk. A bioswale is usually used by parking lots where it's also absorbing a lot of de-icing salts and chemicals and oils from cars and that type of thing. Tippecanoe Library has a bioswale and rain gardens. And so their bioswales are in the parking lot capturing, when you think about cars parked, there's oil, there's sometimes antifreeze, there's stuff leaking, there's de-icing salt, whether you salt the road or not, it's coming off your car where you've driven it. So the bioswale is more designed for parking lot and roadways, where the rain garden is more as your landscape, where it's getting maybe chemicals from your lawn, water from your hard surfaces, but it's more of on the landscape end of things. Great question.
And just a little plug for Tippecanoe too. If any of you are interested in checking out the bioswale, like Melinda said, it's in the parking lot, and actually the rainwater feeds through the bioswale to the rain garden, which is like a really cool engineering piece. Yeah, so go check it out. Got a question from Pat. What are some ways to manage water discharge from a sump pump, and are there any health issues related to that?
So there was a house, and in the picture I had didn't show it, was a couple of guys had this really cool, they ran their sump pump from their house to their rain garden away from it, but it was hard to tell that's what was happening if you weren't there. And they ran, so they would discharge their sump pump into their rain garden directly. And so that's one way to do it. The other thing is if you run your sump pump, if your rain garden intercepts it, so you could send it just like you would a downspout. So you could plan to have your rain garden intercept it as well. So they purposely directed it right there. Typically you have an extension to get that sump pump away from the foundation of your house. So you could direct it to your rain garden. And that would be one way. Some people just direct it to the lawn, so it's a larger area to absorb. Health issues, I need to I have a lot of homework from some of my webinars on different water issues and different treatment of water. The good news about running water through plants and even grass and plants, perennials, and native plants is they do a lot of the filtering before it gets to the groundwater. So it's not something you'd be drinking. Some communities run gray water, and that's the stuff from showers, not your sump pump, from showers, like in California, but they have to do it as sub-irrigation because of health concerns. But with the sump pump, because it's taking water from, that's coming near the house and getting it out away from the foundation of the house, it's not coming from your toilet or your shower or things, but running it through an ornamental garden would be fine. It's getting it away. It's the lawn or a garden. So a rain garden would help you manage it much more effectively. And that's what they did in this small yard. And they had really great success with that.
Got a couple questions about milkweed here. Terry says, much of my common milkweed developed yellow phytoplasma last year, which I understand spreads by leafhoppers. I cut back the plants to the ground. Will the bacteria remain in those plants this coming year? If so, is there a safe way to treat them?
Yeah, one of the problems is it's in the crown of the plant. The plants will come back. The best thing is to remove the infected plants when you find them. Leafhoppers are challenging because the organic products that you could use, you have to hit like an oil. And plus we're trying to bring caterpillars to those milkweeds. So managing them is very challenging. I'm assuming you had it diagnosed, so that was the problem and not just chlorosis from a high population of aphids feeding on it, or sooty mold, which is the mold that the fungus that forms on the honeydew secreted by the aphids, blocks the sunlight, causes the leaves to yellow. So, but if you had it diagnosed by a plant pathologist, best thing is to remove the infected plants. And with milkweed, there'll be plenty of new plants. It's kind of like coneflower. They get that phytoplasm also, called aster yellows. I haven't seen it really a lot on milkweed, not saying, that doesn't mean it's not there. But removing the infected plant is going to help you reduce the problem. So you probably have plenty of milkweed sprouting from the rhizome. Hopefully it hasn't traveled through that underground stem. But yeah, I would say if you find that, control it, because anything that would control those leaf hoppers would be systemic, that would damage the caterpillars. Oils, if you touch the hopper, or insecticidal soap, but you've got to cover them, and they're not residual. That's why they're safe. So there's really, and I don't know of any traps that are out that would capture the leaf hoppers and not other unintended insects you'd want to not control but are trying to attract. Colorado State University is always a place I go to. I haven't seen anything on their site on leaf hoppers, but for those of you out there, they've got really good organic gardening information. I always go to your local university extension service. That's always a great place for local information, but Colorado State does a lot of organic pest management. So check that out too as well.
Speaking of insects, Sarah would like to know, are there any other possible anti-mosquito tips when using rain barrels in addition to the dunks?
Well, keeping it covered. So if you just run the downspout directly into the rain barrel and there's no other opening, that's a great way to prevent the mosquitoes from laying their eggs. They need, I think it's like 7 days to complete their life cycle from egg to larvae to adult, or for the eggs to hatch. So if the water is moving, but you probably aren't going to do that with your rain barrel. So if it's covered, that's good enough. So the mosquito dunks are just if you've got screens where the mosquitoes can get through and lay their eggs. So maybe use a solid one with just a big enough opening to run the downspout, or the MMSD rain barrels now use a diverter. So they have a cover on top, and then you just run the diverter, the pipe, into the side so it doesn't have access for the mosquitoes, or very little. You know, those little guys can get in pretty small spaces.
Question from Kathleen. We have been using the company Aptive for pest control. Do you have any ideas about this kind of natural pest control? Will it affect gardens negatively? I'm not seeing anything negative yet, but what are your thoughts? We're trying to keep the ticks at bay.
And I'm not sure what the product was that what was that again that she was using, Kelly? I'm sorry.
We've been using the company Aptive, APTIVE, for pest control. I don't know if
I'm not sure what product they're using. So what I would ask them for, and again, I always end up with homework after these things. What I'd ask them for is a material safety data sheet on the products they're applying. And that goes beyond the label. So it talks about the safety of the product, environmental impact of the product, which the label has some of that as well. So they should be able to give you the products they're applying. So I'm not sure what they're using, that company is using, but I would ask them for a list of the products, because insecticides, even organic insecticides, are meant to kill things and to kill insects. And so if they're misapplied, or they're applied where we've got native pollen, we've got pollinators or beneficial insects, we could have a negative impact on them as well. So I'm guessing they're probably applying to the shrubs, maybe the lawn area. I get that mosquitoes are a problem. Fans at your sitting area, but mosquitoes are weak flyers. Citronella candles only provide a couple feet of control, but having them burning right next to the, every few feet if you're entertaining. I've actually, taken a fan out. I have pretty high tolerance for mosquitoes, but I know they can be bad. Long sleeves, gloves, long pants. I know it's not comfortable when you're gardening and it's hot, but all of those things, light colors, are good options as well. So if you can get that, if you can't get that information from them, email me at info@melindamyers.com. Be patient, please be patient. I'm way behind, but they should be able to give you that information. And if not, if they give you some chemical names, I could do a little bit more research for you if they don't give you the information that you need.
I see we are getting a few questions about the rain barrel certificates. So we will be hosting some rain barrel workshops with MMSD in May and June. I know those are very popular. So when we send our follow-up email with the recording and the handout and all of that, we'll have links in there to register for those workshops. So stay tuned, they are coming up. And Melinda, I know we're a bit past time. Did you have time for any more questions?
I'm good. I have a reputation, Kelly. As long as you and Beth can stay, I'm good. So, okay. And as long as anybody's listening.
Sounds good. Okay, let's see what else we have here. Bonnie would like to know, can you use the ground cover rye as a mulch around a tree?
The problem with ryegrass, one is rye can be very difficult to, it's a type of grass. It does compete with your tree. So what I would recommend doing is use at least wood chips as much as you can stand, and then put the rye. I know they use some of those green manure cover crops in between orchards, but they usually do them in the pathways between, and then mulch around the tree. So just leaving a little bit of space, especially around established trees, are less susceptible. Just kind of an aside, I used to teach at Milwaukee Area Technical College, and we had a catalpa tree that was so small. When I take students there for ID, they go, "This looks like a bush." And so we expanded the mulch bed a lot, which made it easier for the maintenance people to mow. It was the summer of '95, which, if you remember, was very hot and dry. Nobody watered that tree. It doubled in size just by pushing the grass away from the tree, that competition for water and nutrients. So perennial ground covers, less competitive, mulch is less of an issue. So yes, you might want to just keep it back away. Plus good habitat for voles. Even keeping the mulch away from the trunk of the tree is a good idea, because that's a great way. Voles have been did quite a bit of damage this year in parts of the country.
Okay, and Andy would like to know, do you cut epimedium back in the fall?
You know what? It's somewhat evergreen, and especially for us in Wisconsin in the north, somewhat evergreen means there's 3 or 4 leaves left. I usually wait till the end of winter. It has very fine stems, so there are really no pollinators. So you could either cut it back in the fall, or, when we get one of those really nice days, in March and it's warm, you could cut it back then. And even if you don't get it cut back, it will grow through, and it's usually not too messy, because I've usually a lot of times didn't get around to cutting my back. And because the stems are so nice and wiry, the new growth really masks the old growth and eventually decomposes. So you could do it either way. Leaving it stand for winter, those dead stems do help stop some flow, and you might have a few leaves persist too.
Some questions here from Gwen and Kim. Any recommendations to deal with creeping Charlie, and also how do you get rid of English ivy? Ivy's taken over between 2 fences and I can't dig it out.
So, okay, we'll start with creeping Charlie, because the chelated iron weed killer I mentioned, Heta, the EcoSense, I think it is from Scott's, will take out creeping Charlie. Couple things to keep in mind. Whatever chemical you use, if you treat when it's in full bloom or after a hard frost in the fall, it's more effective at killing it. University of Wisconsin found timing was very important. The other thing is, if you use regular weed killers that you didn't have success with, try spot treating so you minimize your use of chemicals. And I avoid those that have dicamba and banvel. They kill creeping Charlie, but they're harmful for our trees and shrubs. They think that a lot of the decline of urban trees is from excessive use of those products. And where does creeping Charlie usually start? In the shade. So minimize the treatment. Treat when it's in full bloom or after a hard frost. You could try the chelated iron weed killer, or if you use a broadleaf weed killer, just spot treat. And so then you're minimizing the chemical. And keep in mind, it's been flowering and dropping seeds. It takes about 3 years to get it under control for the grass to grow in and fill in and take over. English ivy is an invasive plant in parts of the country, aggressive here, and obviously if it's growing where you don't want it. So a couple things you can do. If you continually cut it back at ground level, any place it's sprouting, you'll eventually starve the plant to death, but you have to be persistent and make sure you get all the stems so it can't put energy back into the roots and keep growing. There are some organic weed killers, but they just burn the tops. They're things like potassium fatty salts, or soaps at a very high concentration, or plant oils. Burnout uses clove. It smells great, but it only burns the top. So it's the same as cutting it back. You repeat applications, and remember, these will damage the top of any plant they touch. And then your last resort, and if you use a total vegetation killer, Finale has a different mode of action than Roundup, but they will damage or kill any plant they touch. If you feel you have to go that route, wipe it on the leaves. Or what I do is take a milk jug, cut the bottom, put it over, and I try to very minimally use this, and treat the weed, but you protect the plants around it, or wipe it on. There are some like roll-on treatments, but I found that got kind of messy. But that is a way, again, if you feel like you got to use that total vegetation killer to minimize the exposure to the environment, you and other plants. And it's a tough one, I know, to control.
So I know we've, of course, done some workshops over the last month about, planting your rain garden, planting your rain garden. Is it still a good time now to start digging, or should folks hold off a little bit?
I'm glad you asked that question because I forgot to mention when you dig your soil, it should be moist, not soggy wet. And that, especially for those with clay soil, it dries out slowly, it warms up slowly. So take a handful of soil, maybe put your shovel in if you're starting from scratch, and then grab a handful of soil and gently squeeze. And if you tap it and it breaks into smaller pieces, it's at a perfect moisture level to begin working. If it stays in a mud ball, it's too wet. You need to wait a few days for it to dry out. And when it's cold, it dries out slowly. So I know we get anxious, and depending on where you are, I was in Iowa, it was 60 degrees, but I heard there was snow back here when I was gone. And the weather's been crazy all across the country. And so let the soil moisture level be your guide. I know we get anxious. So, we have a couple warm days, a couple dry days. You might be able to get out and get started digging.
Loretta in New Berlin would like to know, can I attach my downspout to my sump pump discharge, which goes to the ditch?
Boy, that one, and then the ditch is probably going somewhere, either to a storm sewer or some other waterway. So what we'd like you to do, if possible, is to run it into your yard, into a rain garden, so that some of that's absorbed before it goes in the ditch. You might want to check with your municipality to find out. They may have some guidelines on terms of what you can do. And so maybe first of all is decide, where is that water going to go? Part of that's designed to catch the water off the road. So you're adding to the pressure on that ditch. And then where's that water going? Where's the ditch taking that water? So if you can capture and slow and prevent some of it, at least from going to the ditch, as opposed to running your sump pump right to the ditch, which is going to add pressure to wherever it's taking that water. It's a good question.
I think this is in reference to one of our earlier questions about more contained natural plants.
Oh,
Showy milkweed and red milkweed, are all varieties of milkweed pretty similar if you're planting and worrying about anything spilling over?
great question. So the most aggressive is common milkweed. And yes, it's the one the monarchs prefer. However, they will feed on swamp, also called red milkweed. And that I find is more of a clumper. It may reseed a little bit, so you might want to remove the pods. The plant will come back because it's perennial. And then butterfly weed, I find, is the most contained of them. And Dawn, who works with me a couple years ago, sent me a picture in the spring or in the summer, early summer, for me to use. And she had like 30 monarch caterpillars on her butterfly weed. She lives in the city of Milwaukee. I'm out in the country. I got common milkweed. I got butterfly. And I was so jealous because I didn't have 30 caterpillars on my butterfly weed. If you have heavy clay soil, Prairie Nursery has a variety called clay, that a native plant they found growing in heavy soil, butterfly weed that they found growing in clay soil that was thriving. Because if you've grown butterfly weed, it really likes good drainage. I have sandy soil now. Mine grows great, much better than it did in the city. Swamp milkweed grows taller, about 4 feet. It's more of a clumper too. So those two, and then showy milkweed is not as aggressive either. So those would be some good choices, especially for smaller areas, or if you don't have time to contain that common milkweed. Good question.
Question from Mary. Any tips for controlling violets on a lawn?
Okay, violets are great for pollinators. I'm sure that's not going to make you feel any better. University of Wisconsin found that treating them in mid-September and then again the end of September seemed to be the most effective. And so here's what happens with violets is they not only, the clump gets a little bigger, but when the seeds ripen, After they flower, they form seeds. They shoot their seeds out away from the parent plant and start new colonies. And that's one of the reasons it's so challenging. You could try the organic weed control. Again, if you could keep your lawn healthy. So one of the things might be to do a stopgap. So I know we're trying to not use chemicals on our lawn, but let's say you feel you've got to control those weeds and you spot treat. Maybe up your fertilization. They found one fertilization a year can reduce weeds by up to 50%. So if you're not fertilizing, make sure you start fertilizing. Do the holiday schedule. Memorial Day, if you're in the Midwest and North on cool season grass, Memorial Day, Labor Day, and sometime between Halloween and Thanksgiving before the ground freezes. Doing those 3 applications will give you a good quality lawn that's better able to outcompete the weeds, and then mowing high and mowing often. So weed control is 2-part. Why are the weeds growing better than your lawn? So you have to figure that out first and fix that problem. So it's compacted soil, then you need to aerate your lawn. Is it shade? Then maybe you need a shade tolerant grass seed mix, or you need ground covers. Is it that you're not fertilizing enough? A lot of times clover shows up in a lawn because it's under fertilized. I did a blog for Milorganite on weeds as indicator plants, which is a terrible title, and I forget what they renamed it to. But I talked about, so like ground ivy, creeping Charlie, gets a foothold in shade and compacted soil. Knotweed that grows along the curb, like tolerates salt conditions and compaction better than our grass. So if we fix the problem that's hindering grass growth and helping the weeds, then that gives us the long-term solution. So maybe the short term is to kill the weeds and then beef up your grass so that your lawn can outcompete, so you have fewer problems in the future. But fall applications, mid-September, and then if needed, again, I'm sorry, not the end of September, the end of October.
So another grass question here from Helen. Can I do soil testing and soil prep for growing grass the same way as recommended for the garden?
Yes, great question. So, and I should have made that clear. So thank you. Good question. So when let's say your lawn is having problems in the front, but not the back, or if it all looks consistent, you maybe could do one, but it's always a good idea if say your front lawn is performing different than your side or back to do 3 separate samples. So what you do is you take samples from the corners of the lot and then several from inside. You remove the grass, obviously. You take slices 4 to 6 inches deep, mix that together so you have a cup of soil. UW Extension has a soil testing lab, and the information is on their website. So UW Extension Soil Testing Lab, you'll get the information on how to take the test, download the form, and where to send your sample. Some extension services around the country are no longer doing soil testing, but they have state certified labs they recommend. So yes, great idea, because then you can, and then you tell them I'm growing grass here. And then they know here's the fertilization you need to do for a lawn that's got this kind of soil analysis. So great question. Thanks for asking.
All right, so it looks like we've gotten through our questions for this evening. I just want to thank everyone again for sticking around and attending tonight's webinar. This is really informative and helpful. And for those of you who maybe have missed some of our previous sessions, they are available on the library's YouTube page. And we even have a special Green Ideas playlist that we'll send out in the follow-up emails, so you can watch all of those. I'm sorry, we had just one question. Do you know, are there any issues with parking on permeable surfaces in the city of Milwaukee?
Not that I'm aware of. It's probably not a bad idea. The one picture I showed of the driveway was property in Shorewood. It was kind of their side driveway. You want to make sure they're suitable for northern climates. I would check with the municipality. Department of Public Works is usually who manages that or could get you to the right place to just double check. You could try posting a question to Fresh Coast Guardians does a lot of infrastructure work as well. So they could probably help you better than I can, get you an answer quicker. So you may want to post a question to them because they are doing lots of infrastructure, which is rain gardens, rain barrels, permeable structures, green roofs and things. So let's go to the experts on that one. And that's not
Great
me.
Yeah, and we can include contact info for
Thank
them in our
you.
follow-up email as well. So we'll send out the handout again. And like I said, expect this within a few days, and we'll have it posted on our YouTube channel, as well as registration info for our upcoming webinars this spring. And as Melinda shared earlier, be on the lookout for some exciting programming for Pollinator Month, which is coming up in June. And we're 2 months out, and I know it's going to come very quickly, so we're really excited.
Me too.
And otherwise, I hope everyone has a great evening. And Melinda, thank you so much again for your time and expertise. We really appreciate it. And, it's a joy to host you. So we're looking forward to doing that again soon here.
And thank you guys as well. And everyone who attended. We appreciate you taking the time out of your schedules as well.
Absolutely. So be on the lookout for that email and head to mpl.org for more great programs. And again, if you have questions for Melinda, you can share those at, is it info@melindamyers.com?
Yeah, exactly. And be patient, please.
Sounds great. All right. Well, thank you so much again, and we'll see you soon, and have a great evening, everyone.
Good night.
Take care. Bye-bye.